September 14th, 1929. A single passenger train rolled into Sulphur Springs, Texas, carrying 43 children from New York City. None of them had parents waiting. None of them had homes to return to. And standing on that platform, watching the last of them walk away into uncertain futures, was a man named William Clark. He'd spent 17 years escorting orphan children across America. This was his final trip. The Orphan Train Movement was ending. And what Clark saw in those final months would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because the children weren't just being saved, they were being sorted. And the system that saved 200,000 lives had become something else entirely. Let's investigate. William Clark never planned to become a conductor. He was a bookkeeper at the Children's Aid Society in Manhattan, handling ledgers and donation records in a cramped office on East 22nd Street. The year was 1912. The city was drowning in abandoned children. Police estimated 30,000 homeless kids lived on the streets of New York. They slept in alleyways, stole food from vendors, formed gangs for protection. The lucky ones ended up in orphanages. The unlucky ones disappeared. The numbers told their own story. Clark tracked them obsessively, because that's what bookkeepers did. In 1912 alone, the Children's Aid Society processed 847 intake applications. That was just one organization, among dozens operating in Manhattan. The Hebrew Orphan Asylum handled Jewish children. The New York Foundling Hospital took in Catholic infants. The Colored Orphan Asylum served black children. Each institution operated independently, each with its own placement philosophy, each competing for the same limited donation pool. Clark's ledgers revealed something the society didn't advertise publicly. It cost approximately $18 per month to house one child in a New York orphanage. That covered food, clothing, basic medical care, and minimal education. Multiply that by the thousands of children in the system, and the annual costs became astronomical. The society relied entirely on donations from wealthy benefactors. Most of those benefactors were getting older. Their children weren't as interested in orphan welfare as their parents had been. The economics were straightforward. New York couldn't afford to house all these children. Neither could any other eastern city. But the western states had something New York didn't: land, opportunity, growing populations that needed workers, and families willing to take in children not out of pure charity, but because an extra pair of hands meant survival on a farm or in a small business. The orphan trains weren't invented in 1912. Charles Loring Brace had started the program back in 1853, nearly 60 years earlier. Brace believed cities corrupted children while rural life redeemed them. Send orphans west, he argued, and they'd grow up wholesome, productive American. The first train carried 46 children to Duagas, Michigan. Local families lined up at the station. By sundown, every child had a new home. For decades, it worked exactly as Brace envisioned, or at least, that's what the Society's annual reports claimed. Clark's job was simple: track expenses, file paperwork, balance accounts. But every morning he watched children arrive at the Society's intake center. Some were brought by police, others wandered in alone. A few were dropped off by parents too poor to feed them. One woman arrived with 4 children, under 7. Her husband had died in a factory accident. She made $3 a week in a garment shop. The rent was $2 a month. "Do the math," she told Clark. "I can keep myself alive, or I can keep them alive, not both." Clark started keeping unofficial notes: ages, conditions, where they came from. He tracked which children got placed quickly and which ones languished for months. He'd spent 5 years balancing books for a shipping company. He understood supply chains, efficiency optimization, and watching the orphan intake process, he started seeing the same principles at work. Assess the product, grade by quality, match supply to demand. These were children, not cargo, but the system treated them functionally the same. One afternoon in March 1912, the Society's placement director fell ill with pneumonia. They needed someone to escort children to Michigan, someone responsible, organized, good with numbers. Clark's supervisor volunteered him. 3 days later, he was on a train with 19 kids, most under 10, heading west. The journey took 4 days. Clark had basic instructions: keep children clean, feed them twice daily, maintain order. At each stop, present the children, facilitate placements, move on. The first stop was Grand Rapids. 14 families showed up. Clark lined up the 19 children on the platform. The families approached. A woman walked straight to the prettiest girl, 6 years old, blonde curls, blue eyes. The woman didn't ask her name. She turned to Clark and said, "I'll take this one." Clark asked if she wanted to know anything about the child. The woman looked confused. "Like what?" "Like her name," Clark said. The woman shrugged. "I'll give her a new name anyway." 3 boys went to a farmer who examined their hands, checked their teeth, tested their strength. He picked the 2 strongest. The 3rd boy, smaller and frailer, stayed on the platform. By afternoon, 15 of 19 children had been placed. 4 remained. 2 girls, ages 12 and 13. 1 boy with a pronounced limp. 1 boy who stuttered. The remaining families had left. Clark loaded those 4 back on the train. In Kalamazoo, the 12-year-old got placed. In Lansing, same pattern. Some chosen, others passed over. By Detroit, 3 children remained. A widowed seamstress took the 13-year-old girl. A factory owner took the boy who stuttered. Nobody wanted the boy with the limp. Clark brought him back to New York. Placement failed. The boy returned to the orphanage. Clark filed his report noting 1 unsuccessful placement. The society counted it differently. 18 successful placements, 1 return, 95% success. Clark kept his own count in his personal notebook. 15 children placed legitimately. 3 in concerning situations, 1 returned. His supervisor told him concerns weren't part of his job description. Placements were. When he returned to New York, the society promoted him to permanent conductor. They needed someone who understood the mathematics of placement, someone who wouldn't get emotional. Clark accepted because he didn't know what else to do. For the next 5 years, he ran routes across the Midwest, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, always the same pattern. Load children, unload them, watch selections, document everything. Clark developed a system. He categorized children by placement probability. High probability were young, healthy, attractive. Medium had minor issues. Low probability were older teens, children with disabilities, or anyone previously returned. He learned to arrange platform lineups strategically, put high probability children in the middle, space medium probability between them, keep low probability at the ends. It felt like livestock trading. But it worked. His placement rates improved from 70 to 85%. The society rewarded him with more routes. By 1916, Clark was running trains twice monthly, sometimes carrying 30 or more children. But something shifted in 1917. America entered the Great War. Men left for Europe. Farms needed workers immediately. Families stopped asking for babies. They wanted boys, strong boys, teenagers who could handle plows and livestock. The selection process became faster, more transactional. Is he sturdy? Can she work long hours? Will he eat much? One trip in July 1917 took Clark through Iowa farm country. Harvest season approaching. Farmers lined up looking for labor. They weren't interested in adoption. One farmer told him directly, "I need hands in the field for 3 months. After that, we'll see." Clark placed 6 boys with that man, all between 13 and 16, all strong enough to work. Clark wrote their names and added a note. Query follow-up in 6 months. His routes shifted. He never went back. Those 6 boys disappeared into the system. The war ended in 1918, but demand intensified. The economic boom created new kinds of families. Suburban families wanted children who could be shaped into the middle class. Factory town families wanted workers. Mining families wanted the smallest children, boys young enough to fit into tight underground spaces. Clark noticed the advertisements changing. The Children's Aid Society promoted placements in newspapers weeks before trains arrived. Healthy stock, good breeding, well-behaved, trainable. The society defended it. We're serving the children's best interests. We're finding them homes. Then came 1924. Congress passed the Immigration Act, cutting off European immigrants who'd been filling factories and farms. Between 1900 and 1914, more than 13 million immigrants arrived. When immigration stopped, those jobs didn't disappear. Someone had to fill them. Demand for child labour exploded overnight. Clark's routes expanded, every month, sometimes twice. The society couldn't place children fast enough. In a town outside Omaha, a man selected 3 boys ages 8, 10 and 12. Clark asked the standard questions. Do you have suitable housing? Can you provide education? The man answered yes to everything. But when he asked what work the boys would do, the man laughed. They'll be working the mines. I need small hands for tight spaces. Clark tried to object. He explained that contracts required school attendance. The man pointed to the clause. Education is locally available and practically feasible. His mine was 40 miles from the nearest town. Practically feasible meant Sunday lessons. That satisfied the technical requirements. Clark tried calling New York. He spent 2 hours arguing with his supervisor. The answer came back clear. As long as families met written requirements, conductors couldn't interfere. If Clark started rejecting families based on subjective concerns, the system would collapse. Clark placed those 3 boys. He wrote their names, detailed notes about his concerns. He never saw them again. They vanished into Nebraska's coal country. In Kansas City, a woman selected 6 girls, all between 9 and 13. She ran a textile factory. These girls would live in a dormitory behind the factory, work 10-hour shifts 6 days a week, room board and $2 weekly in wages held until age 18. Sunday school classes satisfied the education requirement. Clark asked to see the dormitory. Clean, basic, rows of beds. The woman explained rotation of kitchen duties, learning domestic skills alongside factory work. By 18, they'd have experience, savings, and practical skills. Everything was technically reasonable by 1924 standards. But Clark couldn't shake the feeling he was facilitating something wrong. These weren't adoptions. These were labour contracts disguised as placements. He placed all 6 girls. What else could he do? If he refused, another conductor would. At least Clark documented everything. Clark started tracking outcomes. Most conductors didn't. He kept notebooks, wrote letters to local officials, requested updates. Of placements he could track, roughly 40% failed within the first year. Children ran away, families returned them. Some ended up on the streets, worse off. A few in county jails, but those were just the failures he could document. What about the children sent to remote farms or mining camps with no follow-up? Clark estimated he had meaningful information on maybe 20%. The other 80% were black holes. He submitted detailed reports showing failure rates, documenting problematic patterns, recommending policy changes, more rigorous screening, mandatory follow-up visits, regional inspectors. The society thanked him and filed his reports. Nothing changed, because changing the system would require admitting problems. Admitting problems would threaten donations. By 1927, Clark handled the hardest cases: children nobody wanted, kids with disabilities, teenagers with criminal records, children already returned from failed placements. He ran specialized routes, smaller groups, longer trips, Wyoming mining towns, Oregon timber camps, families 50 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by dirt roads. No way to verify proper treatment, no way to check school attendance. Clark made placements because the alternative was overcrowded orphanages. Maybe space to breathe was worth the risk, maybe not. He didn't know anymore. Then the economy started cracking. By early 1929, families took longer to decide. They asked more about costs. How much does he eat? Will she need new clothes? Can he work immediately? Some backed out last minute, citing financial concerns. The society ignored the warnings. They had children to place, donations to collect, a mission to fulfill. In June 1929, Clark received instructions for his final route. One last train. New York to Texas, 43 children, the largest group he'd transported alone. Most were teenagers. Some had been in the system for years, cycled through multiple failed placements. Last chance. If they didn't get placed in Texas, they'd age out and end up on the streets. Clark spent 2 weeks preparing, reviewed each file, memorized names, histories, conditions, arranged stops in 8 Texas towns, contacted committees, confirmed host families, sent descriptions ahead. Some committees responded with requests. We need a boy, 14 or older, farm experience. Clark matched children to requests before the train left. On September 1st, they boarded at Grand Central. Clark watched children file in. Some carried small bags with everything they owned. Others had nothing. A girl named Dorothy, age 14, stopped and asked him, "Are we going to be okay?" She'd asked the same question 2 years earlier. That placement failed. The family returned her after 6 months, claiming she was willful. Clark had read the file. Dorothy refused to work 18-hour days in their bakery. That was disobedience. Clark told her yes. He'd been saying that for 17 years. He didn't know if he believed it. The train rolled south through Pennsylvania, Virginia, Tennessee. Clark maintained his routine. Wake at dawn, distribute breakfast, lead prayers, check for illness, resolve conflicts, document everything. This trip felt different. The children were quieter, withdrawn. They knew what awaited, the inspections, the rejections. Some had given up. Clark could see it. They'd go through the motions because adults made them, but they'd stopped hoping. In Tennessee, Clark overheard 2 boys planning to run, disappear into the countryside. One had a cousin in Mississippi. Maybe they'd find him. Maybe not. Either way, better than another failed placement. Clark didn't report them. He understood. Some children had been placed 4, 5, 6 times. After enough rejections, running starts looking rational. The boys didn't run. They stayed. Maybe lost their nerve. Maybe decided to try once more. The first Texas stop was Dallas, September 8th. 15 children stepped off. Maybe 60 people waited. Clark lined them up, tallest to shortest. Boys left, girls right. He'd perfected this over 17 years. Maximum visibility, minimum chaos. A man in an expensive suit walked down the line with a doctor. Not casual inspection, systematic evaluation. The doctor examined teeth, checked reflexes, listened to heartbeats, felt lymph nodes. The man took notes on a clipboard. They rejected 4 children without explanation. Crooked teeth, slow reflexes, 1 cough, underweight, each rejection a head shake. Next. They selected 2 boys, 13 and 15, strong builds, no disabilities, clean, health check. The man asked Clark direct questions. Any illness history? Behavioral problems? Mental deficiency? Clark answered honestly. Clean records, good behavior, no issues. The man pulled out a wallet, counted cash, $50, $25 per child, twice the standard fee. He said the boys would receive excellent care on his ranch outside Fort Worth. Everything the society required and more. Clark took the money because protocol required it. But something felt wrong. The medical examination, the cash payment, the clinical selection. This wasn't a family. This was an employer evaluating workers. Clark watched those 2 boys leave. Thomas Riley, 13, Patrick O'Connor, 15, Anderson Ranch Corporation, Fort Worth. Paid $50. He added a note. Query status in 6 months. Never got the chance. All 15 children placed by day's end. The society would count it as triumph. 15 placements, 0 returns, 100% success. Perfect on paper. Next stop, Waco, then Austin, San Antonio. The pattern repeated with variations. In Waco, families were more traditional, asked about personalities, interests, backgrounds. Most placements looked legitimate. In Austin, smaller crowd, economic worries showing. Families looked harder at costs. Will he need a doctor? How much does she eat? In San Antonio, Clark saw the future. A labor contractor representing 3 ranches, quotas to fill, 4 boys for Ranch A, 3 girls for Ranch B, 2 boys for Ranch C. Evaluated children by size, strength, apparent health, quick selections, no conversation, pure efficiency. Paid cash, provided reference letters, everything technically legitimate. Clark counted families asking about education. His private barometer: Dallas 3 out of 20, Waco 5 out of 18, Austin 2 out of 12, San Antonio 0. Nobody asked if children would attend school. They asked about work capacity. Contracts required education, but defined it loosely, as locally available and practically feasible. In rural Texas, schools might be 20 miles away. Practically feasible meant whatever families decided. Sunday Bible lessons counted, so did reading ranch supply catalogues. Letter satisfied while spirit ignored. By Sulphur Springs, September 14th, 14 children remained. A girl with a limp from polio, a boy with severe stutter, 2 siblings refusing separation, a teenage girl who'd run from 3 placements, a boy from juvenile detention, children nobody wanted. Last chance cases. The platform was nearly empty. 8 families, Monday afternoon. Small town, maybe 3,000. Not many looking for troubled New York teenagers. Clark lined them up one last time. He'd done this thousands of times, but this felt final. Last children he'd ever place. End of something started 76 years earlier. Families walked past slowly, careful questions. They understood these came with complications. One family took the girl with the limp. Older couple, no children. The woman knelt, talked to the girl 20 minutes, asked about interests, favourite foods, what made her happy. Most thoughtful selection in months. A farmer took the stuttering boy. He'd had a speech impediment himself as a child. He knew what it was like. The boy would work but also attend school. The farmer promised. The siblings went together to a family with 4 children. Needed help but seemed genuinely interested. Asked questions, smiled, seemed kind. Within an hour all 14 placed, every single one. Clark stood alone as the sun set. Trip 247 complete. 4,318 children placed across 19 states over 17 years. 47 notebooks filled with observations nobody would read. And he finally understood what he'd been part of. The Orphan Train Movement started with noble intentions. Charles Loring Brace founded the Children's Aid Society in 1853 to save children from New York streets. Revolutionary idea. Send orphans west to families who wanted them. Fresh starts in America's heartland. For decades it worked. Thousands found loving homes, became farmers, teachers, merchants. 2 state governors had been riders. Andrew H. Burke, North Dakota, John Green Brady, Alaska. One became a Supreme Court justice, but somewhere along the way the system changed. Children stopped being adoptions, became placements. Families stopped being parents, became providers. The operation became industrial, efficient, optimized for throughput. Clark saw what nobody wanted to acknowledge. The Orphan Train Movement had become America's largest child labor distribution network, not through malice, through economics, simple supply and demand. New York had too many children. The West had too few workers. The trains connected them. Most children probably ended up fine. Most families probably treated them decently. But fine and decent weren't the same as loved and protected. And the system had no mechanism to distinguish. The contracts required adequate food, shelter, clothing, education, moral training. Define adequate, define moral training. Vague by design because specificity would reduce placements. The language could justify anything. Clark submitted his final report October 15, 1929. 43 placements, 0 returns, 100% success. He didn't mention concerns. What would be the point? 14 days later, the stock market crashed, the economy collapsed, demand for child labour evaporated. Families couldn't afford to keep children. Many were returned or abandoned. The society quietly ended the program in 1930. Mission accomplished. 200,000 children placed over 77 years. They celebrated it as triumph. Clark never conducted another train. Returned to bookkeeping until retirement in 1947. Kept his notebooks locked in a trunk. Never published them. Never spoke publicly. In 1963, a researcher contacted him, writing a history of the movement. Clark was 81, one of the last surviving conductors. He pulled out his notebooks, 47 volumes, names, dates, observations, children sorted by age, strength, appearance, families, categorized by needs. She asked if he was proud. He thought a long time. I saved some of them. I know I saved some. But I can't stop thinking about the ones I didn't. The ones in mines, in factories, in homes where they were worked until they broke. I thought I was rescuing children. Maybe I was just moving inventory. She asked if he regretted it. He said no. Because if he hadn't, someone else would have. Someone who wouldn't keep records, wouldn't notice patterns, wouldn't care. At least I saw what was happening. At least I wrote it down. Clark died in 1968. His notebooks ended up in Columbia's archive, barely noticed for decades. Historians discovered them in the 1990s when researchers re-examined the movement with critical eyes. What Clark documented was a system that saved lives while exploiting them. Good intentions creating opportunities for abuse, an experiment that worked exactly as designed. Which was the problem? The last riders are gone now. The youngest from 1929 would be over 100. Most died decades ago. A few wrote memoirs late in life. Stories vary wildly. Some describe loving families and second chances. Others describe years of unpaid labour and neglect. Many describe both simultaneously. being fed but never loved, given work but denied education, physically safe but emotionally isolated. The orphan trains represent something uniquely American. The belief that private charity can solve systemic problems, the faith that good intentions outweigh structural flaws, the confidence that markets will find optimal outcomes. Both things are true. The trains saved lives and enabled exploitation. They represented the best of American charity and the worst of American capitalism. They showed what's possible when society mobilizes to help vulnerable children, and what happens when economic incentives corrupt noble missions. Clark's notebooks suggest even well-meaning systems become extractive when economics take over. That saving lives and harming them aren't mutually exclusive. That intent doesn't guarantee results. We don't have orphan trains anymore, but we still have systems that sort children. Foster care struggling with the same tension between welfare and cost management, juvenile detention as pipelines to prisons, immigration processing separating families, different mechanisms, same questions. How do we handle children nobody wants? How do we balance compassion with economics? How do we prevent programs from becoming worse than the problems they solve? Clark never answered those questions. He was a bookkeeper who became a conductor who spent 17 years documenting a system nobody wanted to examine. He kept records because that's what bookkeepers do. He raised concerns because he had a conscience. He was ignored because the system valued throughput over outcomes. On that platform in Sulphur Springs, watching the last child walk into the Texas sunset, Clark knew this would be remembered differently than it happened. The orphan trains would be celebrated as salvation. Stories would focus on success cases, the governors, the judge, the reunions, the happy endings. The darker truths would be forgotten. Children in mines and factories, failed placements, families who saw workers, not children, systematic lack of oversight, economic incentives corrupting the mission, all minimized or ignored. But Clark wrote it down. Every name, every placement, every uncomfortable observation. Not because he thought it would change anything, but because someone needed to know what really happened when America tried to solve its orphan crisis by putting children on trains and hoping for the best. The last train pulled out of Sulphur Springs empty. William Clark rode in silence, 47 notebooks beside him, 17 years of truth nobody wanted to hear. He'd asked Dorothy if she'd be okay. She'd been placed with a family 20 miles outside town. Middle-aged couple, small farm. They seemed kind, asked good questions, spent time talking to Dorothy. Clark marked it positive. But he never found out what happened to her. He never found out about most of them. That was the design. Place them, move on, don't look back. Success measured by placements, not by children's actual lives. Clark looked back. That made him different. He couldn't stop wondering, calculating failure rates, noticing patterns, documenting the gap between stated mission and actual outcomes. And what he saw was America at its most complicated. A nation trying to do good while building systems that could harm. A society wanting to save children while needing their labor. A movement accomplishing its mission while creating opportunities for exploitation. The Orphan Train movement ended 95 years ago, but the questions never stopped. We're still trying to protect the vulnerable while acknowledging economics, still building systems that save and harm simultaneously, still telling ourselves good intentions are enough while ignoring structural problems. Clark's final notebook entry, September 20th, 1929. 6 days after the last train. One sentence. I hope they remember us kindly. I hope they forgive us eventually. They did remember kindly. For decades, the movement was celebrated without criticism. Only later, when researchers found documents like Clark's notebooks, did the complexity emerge. Did people start asking harder questions? Did the narrative become honest? Clark died believing his documentation didn't matter. He was wrong. The notebooks mattered. The truth mattered. It just took longer than he expected for anyone to listen. If you want to understand how American charity can become American commerce without anyone noticing the transition, there's another story about progressive reform that went sideways. That video is on screen now, and if you made it this far, subscribe. This channel covers the economic history they don't teach in schools, the uncomfortable parts, the parts that complicate the narratives. I'll see you in the next one.